giving credit where it's due. And I come from the old days of radio. Do you remember radio? It was so personal. People called in, they requested songs, and they won stuff. They got to know the DJs. I remember as a teenager, we got to know the DJs so well, we used to bring them donuts, and they would come to some of our Beatles fan club events. Oh my, she's telling her age without doing that. Well, in the interest of keeping this podcast a little bit like radio and giving credit where it's due, I want to do a shout out today to Beth Ertz. Because if it weren't for Beth raving about the person that you'll be meeting in a couple of minutes, I wouldn't have known about her wonderful work. Well, I know now, and you will soon if you don't already. Hi, I'm Victoria Moran, and I welcome you to the Main Street Vegan Podcast. And that wonderful guest that you may be meeting for the first time, and you may know her very well from everything she's doing on Substack and YouTube and speaking all around the country, is Dr. Laurie Marbas. She is an MD and MBA, double board certified in family and lifestyle medicine. She's a U.S. Air Force veteran, an author, and a speaker, and she founded the Habit Healers community with Chef Martin Oswald. Now, what's a habit healer? Well, those are experts dedicated to helping the rest of us reclaim our health through deeply researched habit-based strategies rooted in lifestyle medicine. And through that Habit Healers Substack, she does so much education, so much uplift. She's also got a podcast over there, and she has a concierge medical practice making evidence-based care accessible and actionable. Welcome, Dr. Marbas.
Thank you for having me.
Such a pleasure. So, I just want to jump right in with something that I think is so timely. You talk about metabolic health,
Yeah.
and very often when I hear that phrase, it's not coming from our plant-based doctors, it's coming from people who are saying, don't have any carbs and eat a lot of meat. So,
Mhm.
can you bring this together for us?
Yeah, just to start with, I've been plant-based myself for 14 years, and it was a patient who had mentioned meat and dairy upset her stomach. So that's kind of where I started, was in a little town called Rough, Colorado. And over the years, the one disease that really responded very well is type 2 diabetes to going
Mm.
fully plant-based. There were people who would attempt a keto diet, but then their cholesterol would go up and some other things would start getting worse. So how is that possible when you're like glucose is supposed to be the enemy with the diabetes? Well, let's talk a little bit about that. So first of all, to understand that insulin resistance is multifactorial. Many things can worsen it, inflammation, but especially a diet that's high in saturated fats. Because what's happening here is we're making our muscle and other organs less sensitive to insulin. And insulin is a very important hormone. Don't get me wrong. It's not, you shouldn't see blood sugar rise after eating, but to a certain degree. So how does a plant-based diet help? Well, first of all, you have fiber. I consider that the probably the MVP, right? So plants, of course, are the only source of dietary fiber. And what happens is when you consume fiber, it really slows the glucose absorption, right? It also feeds your beneficial gut bacteria in that colon. It keeps insulin from spiking after meals because it slowed down that glucose absorption. And when you look at the data, more whole food plants, there's less insulin resistance. And you just basically you track more and more with lower fasting insulin, meaning your body has to put out less insulin to keep the glucose in check. You will also see visceral fat drop. So that is the fat that's around your organs and around the belly area, and ectopic fat, which is fat that infiltrates muscle, the liver, the pancreas. And when you see plant predominant diets, they tend to reduce visceral fat, even without calorie counting. And visceral fat is a real metabolic troublemaker because it's highly inflammatory. It has a direct route to the liver because it's so close. And we just really need to be understanding that that is one thing we do not want to do is grow our visceral fat. And then also, the sooner someone adds more plants, your microbiome really changes really quickly. Your gut bacteria composition starts changing within days of increased fiber intake, which really favors the short chain fatty acid production. And again, that improves your insulin sensitivity. We also have all the wonderful things that come with plants like polyphenols, because they really do more than being an antioxidants. But polyphenols are in berries, they're in your dark green leafy vegetables, legumes, and they activate things that really help improve your insulin sensitivity. You also see increase nitrates, which will also help your blood pressure. You also have higher sources of potassium, which will also, again, help your vascular health. But even, someone doesn't have to be perfectly whole food plant-based, but just moving more and more in that direction, you're going to see a very quick shift. And one of the foods that I'm a huge fan of in the plant-based space is beans and legumes. And I think a lot of people sometimes will shy away from eating beans because especially if they're new to adding more fiber to their diet, because it can cause some bloating and discomfort. So we want to enter that quickly, but it has such a wonderful array of nutrients, including protein, which is really important, especially as we get older. And we really want to maintain that protein density in our diet so we don't put ourselves at risk for sarcopenia, which is another risk factor for insulin resistance.
Well, it's so utterly convincing. And of course, I was already convinced, having been doing this for over 40 years. But
Wow.
a couple of weeks ago, someone gave me a link to watch the Maha movie. I didn't even know
Mm,
there
I
was
didn't,
one.
I have no idea what that is, it even is.
16 parts,
Oh
but it's a
my.
lot of medical doctors, some naturopaths and others, but primarily functional medical doctors implying that the only way to deal, well, pretty much with anything, but certainly with blood sugar issues, is a very low carbohydrate, high protein, high fat diet. When people get this information from their own doctor, or they're sitting at an extended family table and everybody is pounding them with that, how do they respond?
Well, I think there's several ways. For myself, I take it on as I am a physician and someone who questions me, I'm happy to bring out the science and be a little bit more technical in that conversation on a one-on-one basis. But for someone who doesn't necessarily want to get into a deeper discussion, I would offer an array of reactions. Number one is, well, this is working for me. I feel better. I have less inflammation. You do you, I do me. That would be step one. But if you are a little bit deeper into, like, I'd really like to educate my family in a loving manner. One way to ask is like, well, let's look historically at even when people say the paleo diet, how much actual fiber did they consume? And it was approximately about 100 grams per day. And if you look at the current status of the US, average US citizen, we may get 12 to 15 grams per day. So to say that, we were eating a meat heavy diet, and we should lean towards that, I was like, well, I would say we probably were only going to eat meat when it was available and we consumed it very quickly because we maybe had one large kill, then we were gathering the rest of the time, right? But you didn't have refrigeration and those type of things to store food safely. And plus our lifespan was pretty short. So again, there's some things there that aren't favorable to a human that's living in the modern world.
Yes.
And when someone says, well, I went on a more keto diet, what I saw was my blood sugar dropped. Well, of course it dropped because you remove carbohydrates. So one thing that I would say that our, keto cohorts and plant-based cohorts would agree upon is removing highly processed food, ultra processed foods, because that alone is going to improve your health regardless of what dietary pattern you follow. So if at least start there with the foundation saying, hey, I agree, we should remove ultra processed foods, but I'm moving towards more of a whole food plant-based diet. Someone else may be moving more towards what they consider whole lower carbohydrate diets. And when we look at the actual data, and we consume whole plant foods. For example, I had a patient who literally, she was on 60 units of insulin, and within 72 hours of strict going to a whole food plant-based diet, I had to stop all of her insulin because her blood sugars dropped so quickly. And she was my first lesson on how quickly a whole food plant-based diet could really start changing someone's trajectory as far as their blood sugar. And why is that? She was eating carbohydrates because it comes back down to fiber and all the things that come along with fiber and what it does to your body. You have lower inflammation, you have changes in your gut bacteria, all those things. You lower your glucose response. Again, yes, we still need protein, but you get protein in plants. That's why I always say, encourage people, make sure that you're getting those legumes. Don't walk away from them. If you're struggling, start with lentils, small doses, and then gradually increase. And that'll help give your body some time to adjust without the discomfort, or cook them or blend them. There's lots of ways to consume these foods with less gastric discomfort that a lot of people complain about. And again, when it comes to the keto component, we're really putting ourselves at risk for cardiovascular health, right? So we're going to be raising our cholesterol impact, the amount of cholesterol that we're going to have to deal with. Sometimes people will feel better also on a keto diet because they're removing some agitation in the gut, which will also decrease inflammation. So they take that as a signal that that's helping them. But in the long run, when you look at the dietary patterns, there again, blue zones, just looking at the data, the long-lived humans with less chronic disease is plant-predominant diets.
Mm.
And there's just no way to argue with historical data. And again, um, I don't want to dismiss anyone who has a different dietary pattern. I'm just keep leaning in on saying add more plants. Where can we meet in the middle? And I appreciate the ethical component of this, but you're not going to win anyone over with an ethical argument. What you will do is win them over with, hey, this could actually help your health. It helps your gut bacteria, it decreases inflammation, increases fiber, and all of these things will help. Fiber will also gather up the cholesterol that your body makes. Your body makes about 80% of the cholesterol that you'll see. Typically, when dietary patterns of those who eat an omnivorous diet is only about 20% comes from the diet. So you'll see that significant drop in the beginning as you switch to a plant-based diet. A lot of people will stay there, but sometimes they trend back upwards. Very common pattern as your body adjusts and it makes the cholesterol that it needs. Now, does it mean that you should be at a higher cholesterol? No, not necessarily. It depends on your heart disease risk factors. There's so many variables with each human and their experience and their genetics. That's a conversation to have with your doctor. But again, I've never seen anything move the needle in health with autoimmune disease, metabolic health, cardiovascular health, all of these things, other than a plant-based diet. Like it was the real eye opener for me. Like I said, 14, 15 years ago, when I switched to plant-based diet after a patient, we accidentally discovered a plant-based diet. And I've been convinced ever since. I told people I started, going down the rabbit hole, and I've yet to pop my head up because I just keep going deeper, deeper, and trying to figure out ways to open the path to a more plant predominant diet to many people who may not agree to be fully, but the more people I can be eating more plants, it's going to be better for the animals, the earth, and our health altogether. And I try not to be closed-minded. I try to have conversations, open-minded, and explain my point of view tends to be scientifically driven. It was the science and patient responses that led me down this path. And then, of course, changing myself and my family in the process has been phenomenal.
Beautiful. So, just a technical question. I think that so many of our very well-educated listeners are aware of keeping ultra-processed foods out of their diets. What about kind of midway? So, I'm talking, let's see, instant oatmeal, whole grain tortillas, whole grain pasta. Where do we put those things?
So I think we really have to pay attention to, so I tend to lean in towards metabolic health, right? And so when you look at the data, it's just really fascinating. It's the really high postprandial or after meal glucose rises that actually cause a lot of damage. And so it can actually cause inflammation. You'll see those responses really can put you on the path towards more insulin resistance. So when I talk about ultra processed foods, of course, we understand those chips and donuts and things like that. But as we, like you said, move into that gray area where they're still processed, but tend to be maybe more healthy than, the ultra processed, I would say make those an occasional. But when you do consider, let's say, oatmeal, well, let's move toward rolled oats, right? Because we're going to see less of that effect of that really rapid glucose response, less inflammation, less difficulty for your body to handle, because we were built and made and evolved to take in whole foods, not the processed foods, even, definitely not the ultra processed foods or Franken foods, but even the processed foods themselves. Now the cooking piece, some people say, well, canned foods are processed, sure, but you have to cook them to eat them. So this is just, I can still consider that a whole food, not necessarily processed in that sense. But when you take, for example, the whole oat groat versus instant oats, that oatmeal, that is a very different response in your body and your blood sugar. When you look at like CGM data, which is the continuous glucose monitor data, and you're watching someone's blood sugar, even on myself, because I experiment on myself all the time. Because the more I understand um, how the body works by experimenting with myself, I can share those stories. It's a very non-threatening way to share with people, hey, this is what happens when, I try to get my blood sugar up high, and this is what happens when I did this or do that. You could try these things. Of course, everyone's going to be a little bit different, but let's say we have whole grain tortillas. That's better than white tortillas, of course. But better yet would be like a sprouted grain tortilla, like Ezekiel's type brand. So just thinking, how can I get closer to that whole food component, even if it still ends up being a wrap of some sort? There's a brand called Wraps, WRAWP, I think. It's like raw wraps. They're made out of vegetables and fruits. They're very good. I've used them many times. I have patients that love them. And so I would certainly move you towards that direction, or the Ezekiel brand. Same goes with bread. Ezekiel type breads, the whole grain breads. Of course, that's better than white bread. I don't think I even eat white bread after I was a kid because it just grossed me out, just the whole idea. But anyway, it's like, and still, what can you add into it? So you're not just eating the tortilla by itself, right? So let's add in the vegetables and the beans. That alone is going to help it improve the profile. So maybe that's just the carrier. For example, my friend, Chef Martin Oswald, which you had mentioned earlier, we run our community together, we do lives every Wednesday on Substack, and he cooks. He lives in Austria. We met actually when he lived in Aspen, Colorado, because I lived in Rifle, and we've been friends a very long time. And what's fun is how he'll bring up something. He goes, okay, here's he said, well, I'm going to take summer rolls and show you how to elevate their nutritional profile. He goes, the wraps in of themselves have zero nutrition, but they're the carrier for everything else. So then he's putting in turmeric tofu and all sorts of greens, and he's throwing in carrots and sweet potatoes and all these incredible different arrays and different spices. And you're just like sesame seeds, and you're just like, whoa, that is a completely different profile of any summer roll I've ever seen. And those are the things that you need to be thinking about. How can I elevate the nutrient, profile density of this food that I have in front of me? And that's how I would approach it.
Oh, that's thrilling. And gosh, I'd like to have a friend like that, but I guess you can have one on your Substack
You sure can.
every Wednesday. So there's something very unusual about you. I've known you, what, 30 minutes and have already figured that out, not even 30, that you actually listened to a patient and made changes in the way that we would think of as kind of backwards. So congratulations for doing something so incredibly brave. So can you help other people who are looking for a doctor? So first, before we even get to plant-based, just help us understand. So you are a family practice doctor, you're a lifestyle medicine doctor. So
Yeah.
help us understand, what's the difference between family practice and
Yeah,
internist, and what's the
sure.
difference between all those and primary care?
Sure. So, okay, you go through. college, and then you go through medical school. That's 4 years. And then you have residency. So as you come out of medical school, everyone's the same, right? So we are medical school graduates, and then we go in what we call specialized. So I went through a family medicine residency, which is 3 years. And internal medicine, which is the internist, they also have a 3 year residency. Those two practices would be where I would consider primary care. Sometimes OB-GYNs are also considered primary care for women, depending on what that, particular physician's practice looks like. So what we do in family medicine is we take care of children, babies. It's like the workhorse of medicine, right? So I was active duty Air Force. I was a physician in the Air Force. So one thing that I quickly noticed is that they would deploy you anywhere they needed help with anything. So if you needed help in the surgery room, you throw in a family medicine doctor because part of our training is surgical. We deliver babies. We were in the ICU. We did internal medicine. We did everything. We did pediatrics. So the that was very beneficial for me to see the wide variety of care. And where I practiced was old traditional family medicine in West Texas. And we were very busy. We did everything, ER, everything, deliver babies, nursing home, you name it, we did everything. I had patients that were 3, 4 generations in my practice as a resident. And so then when I went to practice in Rifle after the Air Force, it's a small town in Western Colorado. You did a lot of things. You were in the ER, you took care of the inpatient patients. I was hospice director. I ran, again, the elder care, you name it, we were there. The ER would call us if there was a baby that needed to be delivered, right? So that was never my favorite. I delivered enough in residency was not my favorite. But that's family medicine and that's internal medicine is strictly more adults. They are the ones that are also set to what we call a fellowship. They would go into cardiology or rheumatology or allergy medicine, or maybe they go into gastroenterology, right? So those type of specialists did internal medicine first, and then they did a fellowship to further diversify their training, or I should say more specialize their training. Family medicine, typically you'll see sports medicine. You might see a few different other beyond family medicine, but typically if you're going into family medicine, my daughter's also a family medicine doctor, you're just doing the regular old, let's take care of everybody, really enjoy getting to know a family and a patient well. Of course, the landscape of medicine has changed dramatically over the last 20, 25 years. And it's very sad to see family medicine just kind of shrink because the cost of your medical education is $250,000 to $350,000. Unfortunately, salaries of primary care physicians are the lowest of all, but we're also probably the most responsible of care for a wide variety of things. We have to catch things and send you to the specialist. There's so many things that we have to do. You as a medical student, you see what debt you're going to have. A lot of them go, well, I'm not going to do primary care. I can't even afford to pay off my student loans. So we're seeing that decline. We're seeing nurse practitioners, PAs kind of step in to fill that role. Unfortunately, no disrespect to those, but they just don't have the same training as someone who goes through medical school, goes through 7 years of post, college training to get to that state. Now, lifestyle medicine, what's interesting, that's just an additional board certification from the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. It focuses on where actually it should just be part of every single foundational aspect of medical school should be rooted in lifestyle medicine. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case yet. I know it's growing. It certainly is changing, but it's like moving the Titanic. It's going to take some time. So what you'll see is individuals who've already practiced get burnt out. They get a little glimpse of maybe a plant-based diet, or they hear about the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. And go, wow, that's fascinating. Patients really love that. I love practicing this way. And then they start educating themselves and they'll start incorporating it into their practice. And that's basically what I did. Of course, I came out of the Air Force, so I was already very physically active and I was healthy already. So we always ate pretty healthy anyway, because I grew up in a home, we didn't have a lot of money. So we ate primarily plant-based diet just because we couldn't afford a lot of meat. So we ate beans almost every day. We grew our own vegetables. We had some fruit whenever it was, seasonal and on sale. Other than that, my mom's like, we're not eating, you know, Cheerios. You're like, you're getting oatmeal, you're getting grits. This is what you're going to get because it's cheaper. It makes complete sense. And it was to my benefit. Um, and so, yeah, that's the difference from all the specialties.
Wow, that's so interesting because my dad was an all-time doctor. You know, he was
Mm,
ENT was his specialty, but he did everything.
yeah.
And people came in expecting everything. And
Mm.
I remember helping in his office. And it was just so interesting to see how people depended on him. And what I see these days, and it may just be a big city thing because I'm in New York, but the primary care doctors are basically people who send you to
Yeah,
somebody else.
yeah,
And so the idea of having a doctor that you can
yeah,
confide in and get to know, they're out there. They're just
yeah.
hard to find.
Yeah, it's hard. And the ones who do take that approach fill up very quickly, and you'll usually see them with closed practices.
Yeah.
And it is, especially as corporations take over smaller practices and there's less individual physicians out there or a smaller group of private physicians working together, you're going to see less and less of that just because it's just impossible. Patients are sicker, it's more complex care. Um, and so it is hard until we probably need double the amount of primary care that we have now. There's definitely a shortage.
So on your YouTube, you have a fascinating, lots of fascinating videos. You have one that's called A Doctor's Journey from Physician to Healer.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think this that word to heal is almost disrespected. It's not a very
Hmm.
scientific word, perhaps, in the
Yeah.
modern world. So tell us about that video and about what that means, your journey from physician to healer.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to understand that I wanted to be a physician since I was 10. So my little sister was 4 when I was 10, so she's 6 years younger, and she was very sick most of the first part of her life. Was we didn't have medical insurance. My parents struggled to put food on the table most days, and so we dealt with a lot of things at home. But she kept getting really high fevers, and we lived in a little town called Fort Sumner, New Mexico. I was born and raised in New Mexico, and unfortunately, for 2 years, she was just kind of, she was told that it was normal for a 2-year-old to have high fevers and all these things. Come to find out, we found a urologist, Dr. Haynes, who discovered that she had an abnormality of the ureter that goes between the kidneys and the bladder, and she kept getting kidney infections. She had surgery to correct it, and she turned into a healthy child. And as a 10-year-old, I remember sitting, it must have been in the hospital going, this is so cool. It was for a follow-up on, I was like, this is what I want to do. So it was that moment that I was able to, and it was really fun because I actually got to meet Dr. Haynes like 40 years later.
Oh,
So it was like 5 or 6 years ago, yeah, that I got to meet Dr. Haynes in person, and I told him that story. And he actually remembered operating on my little sister because it was just such an interesting case. But anyway, what was fascinating about the healing aspect of it, I thought, oh, you go through medical school, you become a doctor, you're going to heal people, right? That idealized version of I'm going to be able to take a sick person and get them well, and they can go and lead their life and do what they want to do, and become the healthy kid like my little sister did. And I quickly realized, uh, well, one in medical school, that it was very driven to manage disease. I don't think it really was conscious awareness that that was the case, but it was certainly building the case just by experience, by what we were learning. We weren't learning to take a healthy human and keep them healthy. We were learning how to react to an unhealthy human and get them to a stabilization point, never how to thrive, which was really interesting. And when I think about my idealized version as a 10-year-old, it was the true healing, the fully healing, the thriving piece. So I think what happens with a lot of physicians is we get stuck in this quagmire of the modern medicine, and we just lose sight of why we entered medicine to begin with. And some people go, "Oh, you just become a doctor for the money." It's like there's much faster ways to make a lot more money than giving away your youth and coming back with a lot of debt. I promise. Don't do it for the money. And so, what was interesting is I went through medical school, then I went into the Air Force, uh, and it was just a lot of politics. Met some amazing people in the military, but I couldn't stay. I got out and I went to, practice in Rifle, Colorado, and I really began to understand the stressors of regular medical practice, all the insurance responsibilities. You're doing pre-authorizations, you're on the phone talking with your insurance companies. Like that was not part of anything that I was taught. But then I found this patient, right, that really, she said meat and dairy upset her stomach one day. I told her to stop eating meat and dairy. I wasn't plant-based yet. This was like early 2012. And she came back in 30 days with her daughter, who was 16 at the time, and pulled her out of school to come to this appointment, mind you. And she's like, now you tell Dr. Marbas what you did. Being a mother at that time, because I went through medical school with three little kids, they were 5, 3, and 10 months when I started medical school. So I really appreciated the mother conversations. I was thinking, man, this mom brought me this kid so I can have the sex talk or something with her, right? Because I've been put in those positions. And she goes, no, no, just tell Dr. Marbas what you. She goes, well, Dr. Marbas, I wanted to help my mom eat a healthier diet like you told her to. And I felt so good that I stopped both my ADD medications, her attention deficit disorder medications. And mind you, this happened in 30 days. A 16-year-old made her own decision. And what was interesting about that, and I was like, wow, that's incredible. And the mother goes, yeah, why was she able to do that? I said, I don't know, but that's the coolest thing I ever heard. And we just started talking about what they were doing. And it was like a dimmer switch coming on. It's like, so you were just eating plants? She goes, well, yeah. And so it never really, like the vegan diet or a plant-based diet, like it had never entered my vernacular, right? It was just not part of my daily vocabulary. I'd certainly tell people stop eating the junk food and that stuff, but I never thought about categorizing the foods and removing animal products. I just truly didn't appreciate that. Um, I started, as soon as that appointment was over, I Googled plant-based diet, ADD. The China study came up, T. Colin Campbell's book, of course. I ordered it. I got it in a day or two. I read it in 2 days. Now, mind you, if you haven't read this, it's a very dry, scientifically evidence-based book. But I was so fascinated they were turning off cancer with plants. And I remember sitting in our bedroom on the floors. I do a lot of things on the floor, just more comfortable. And my husband would walk by and I'm like, they are turning off cancer with plants. And he goes, okay. Little did he know what was coming down the pipeline. So 2 weeks later, as I'm trying to figure out in my head, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for me as a physician? Because I want to live the life that I'm telling patients to live themselves. And I
Mhm.
really, because I can't lie to someone and say, oh, stop smoking and I'm smoking, or go eat a plant-based diet and I'm not, right? I really need to be transparent. Because I can't sleep. Like but I don't, I have a conscience. It's like I need to sleep. I need a clear conscience. So what happened was I had a lupus patient come in 2 weeks later. Now, lupus is a very difficult disease to manage. It can be terminal in many cases, but this patient was in her early 40s. She was younger, well, in her late 30s, I should say, because I was in my early 40s at that point. And she said, Dr. Marbas, I don't think I can keep working. She had a family practice, her own family business that she was running. She was unable to maintain it and keep it. She was on 12 different medications, on 50 pounds overweight. A couple of those medications include methotrexate, which is basically a chemo type drug. It was an immune suppressant type medication, and high doses of prednisone. And bless her heart. I was looking at her going, well, there's not a whole lot of medications we can change here. Because to see a rheumatologist to manage these type of disease, you had to drive to Denver, which was over the Rocky Mountains. And if you've ever traveled over the Rocky Mountains, especially in the winter, you're going to know you only do this when you have to. And so family medicine, again, like I said, we're just kind of the generalist that handles everything. I was having these conversations with her and I said, but I've been reading about this plant-based diet and I have about 14 days of knowledge. I told her a little bit about the other patient and the dramatic responses, like, would you be willing to try that? And she goes, yeah, I'm willing to try anything. I said, but before you go, I've been reading about this anti-inflammatory component of this plant-based diet. I want to measure CRP. Now, this is C-reactive protein. It's an inflammatory marker in the blood, just a generalized inflammatory marker. Hers was 300 times normal, the high normal. Now, mind you, she was on all these medications to suppress the immune system, yet she continued to have this inflammation. She was having headaches most days of the week. And again, I told you about the weight. 2 weeks later, she came back in 14 days because I said, I can't wait longer than that, but 14 days. We'll just have to figure out what that we'll see what that does. We measured her CRP had dropped 300%. It was just outside normal. She was 8 pounds lighter and migraines were gone. Fast forward 5 months, she's lost 50 pounds off of seven of those 12 medications. Within 2 years, her lupus antibodies were undetectable for the first time since she had been diagnosed. Now, mind you, that will fluctuate depending on the situation. However, at that 2 week point when she came back, I was like, that's it. I'm going on a plant-based diet. Now, mind you, I went home to a husband, an 18-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 13-year-old. Yeah, all teenagers. Granted, I had very good kids. They were amazing children. And I said, we're going on a plant-based diet. I walked in the house. It was a Friday evening. I took a garbage can, threw everything in it, the milk, the cheese. And mind you, I love cheese, love cheese. I had an affair with cheese almost on a daily basis, but it was off it goes because I was so convinced and still am and we put in the meat. It didn't matter. It was in the garbage. Now, mind you, I also had a quarter pound of a quarter of grass-fed beef in my freezer. Because that's the healthy eating. It's the grass-fed beef. But we lived in Colorado, and you don't just throw that amount of meat in your garbage can because you're going to attract things. Because we lived in rural America, Western Colorado. There were large creatures that you don't want to attract. And so I was thinking, how am I going to get rid of this? Because I'm not going to give it to any human. And I was like, maybe I give it to animal shelter. Do they cook it? So I was still processing that. So this was a Friday evening. I stayed up to 1 a.m. trying to figure out how to feed my family because I was like, okay, I got to figure out like plant-based, like what does this mean exactly to cook? I was still learning. But we went to church on Sunday morning and it was about an hour's drive from where we lived. And we came back. So it was around 4 or 5 hours later. And we opened up the garage and it stank of just rotting meat. And what must have happened was around that Friday evening is that the freezer just stopped and all that meat had opportunity to melt. And when we left, there was nothing there. But when we came back, it was literally a river of blood and tissue, ugh, just decomposing meat. And my husband goes, "Well, if you hadn't been with me at that point, I said that you unplugged it." Now, I forgot to mention, like, what did my family do when I did all this? My husband goes, "Well, are you still cooking?" And I said, "Yes." And he's like, "Okay." And he's been fine since. And so my three kids, they never questioned it because I always raised my kids like, listen, I'm not a short order cook. I'm your mom. I cook food. I buy the food. You eat it or you'll eat it the next meal. It really doesn't matter to me. You'll be fine. And it has done well for them. They're not picky. My two boys are fully plant-based. My daughter, I would say 95%, she's more pescatarian. Um, and I couldn't be more thrilled. My husband's still plant-based. And so I'm thankful for being just the way it is. And the kids, the way we changed is like when we go out, you guys do what you want. You can order your meat, whatever. But at home, we're eating a plant-based diet because this is where I'm paying the mortgage, I pay the bills, so this is what it is. Some people may agree with that, but I found that it works very well because that's what parents should be doing, in my opinion. So anyway, so that's how it transpired. And boy, it's a really long answer for your question. But as I was really appreciating the healing point, at that point, I really understood healing. And then I went down the path of helping people transition to a plant-based diet, learned a lot. I also started learning about lifestyle medicine. I took the first board certification back in 2017. And then I really, really started appreciating habits and behavior psychology. So I interviewed James Clear on my podcast 8 years ago. I have a quote on his actual website from me. So, BJ Fogg, a lot of these amazing people who are in kind of the tip of the spear, leading the way with habit formation and practice and research, I've really dove into. And I started my podcast 10 years ago because I could understand why someone who would lose 200 pounds, they were 400 pounds most of their life, switch to a plant-based diet and keep off 200 pounds for 10 years, but others struggled to do it for a week. I was like, what is the difference here? And so I want to interview those who are successful so I can understand what is the common thread here. What is the piece that everyone that gets it, and those who don't. And I went through a lot of different understanding and talking and conversations and trials with patients to land where I am now, what I call habit healing, right? And so, how do we approach it through tiny actions, moving the needle? What does the data say on which habits actually are healing? How does someone know a habit is healing for themselves? Which ones move the metabolic needle? And that's when I kind of more flipped was like when I understood the behavior piece along with what actions are needed, that merged into I'm not just a physician. I would consider myself helping someone become a habit healer or heal their habits. And so that is why you'll see the name of the podcast and the Substack is the Habit Healers.
And that's so important and oftentimes misunderstood. I think when something comes easy for somebody, whether they're a physician or not, they're just like, yeah, just
Mhm.
do it. I mean, I do it.
Right.
But it's very, very different
Yeah.
for others. So how wonderful that you have landed there. So you do talk in some of your literature about weight loss, and it's
Yep.
almost like, is that an archaic phrase these days in the age of Ozempic? Is it even a problem? Where is the whole weight issue in America today, in your opinion?
Well, obviously, it's still an issue. I think the GLP-1s, the different generations, we have our first generation, which is strictly more toward like some glutatide, which is the GLP-1 factor. And when you look at second generation, which is like tirzepatide, it's affecting GIP, GLP-1 together. They're hitting a couple of processes. Then we have third generations coming down the pipeline, which are not out yet, which are also very interesting in how they approach metabolic health. I will put it this way. When I see patients, because I am licensed currently in all 50 states, I'm letting some of them go as I'm pulling back on seeing patients. I'm not accepting new patients anymore just because I've got a very full panel, and it's kept me very busy. But what's been interesting is people come to me and we work through everything that they're struggling with. Maybe they've struggled with weight since menopause, or maybe they've had weight issues their entire lives, or maybe they're stress eaters, or they'll lose the same 100 pounds, every 10 years. Whatever the reason, what's been really fascinating is to see who will grab hold of, a whole food plant-based diet and stick with the boundaries of that and understand and not struggle, or maybe they do struggle, or they find ways to manage their stress and sleep and exercise. It really depends on the personality of the person, their support system, and their environment, and how much control and how much they actually set up their environment to set them up for success. Because most of our habits are driven by our external environment, right? Because, I have a fun story is that when we sold our home in California in 2023 and we spent 10 months in our RV, which I'm in right now because we're traveling. And in that 10 months, we had to use a virtual mailbox. And then after 10 months, we were helping one of our kids settle in Las Vegas, and we suddenly had a real mailbox again. Well, the first time I realized that I hadn't checked our mail, and the real mailbox was 3 weeks later. So my habit of checking the mail disappeared. So these things will change. Like you think there's some habits you won't unless it's necessary for survival, that you wouldn't forget, like checking the mail. It's like, oh yeah, yes, you can. You will forget because you have these cues, right? And I have a whole fun article about that. But yeah, I think when you look at individuals who struggle with the weight and they still struggle even on a plant-based diet, or because then they move towards maybe the really ultra processed foods, I actually prescribe GLP-1s and I use them regularly because I find they're a really interesting opportunity for people to have food noise turned down in their mind, and build the habits that they know how to do, but they struggle with. And so I tell them, you're starting on island A, we're going to end on island B. There's a bridge, and GLP-1s are part of that conversation sometimes. Certainly leaning more towards them. And people are doing really well. It's accelerating their weight loss so we can get them into a healthy metabolic state quicker, which is more important for their lifespan, a healthy lifespan. And then we have to have the conversation, is there's a maintenance phase? Is how do we come off of them and not regain the weight? What does this look long term? And I said the window of opportunity is set here because there will be probably a place when people get to where the GLP-1s don't work anymore for them because you will see that plateau effect. You get to the highest dose, or maybe they get to a higher dose and they cannot tolerate it, and the lower doses aren't moving the needle in weight loss. What do you do then? Right now, you're just out of luck. You try a different generation. There's lots of different things you can do. But while we're seeing the weight loss, we've got to focus on these lifestyle habits. And the quicker you build these habits, the more gung ho you are about it because now that food noise is gone. You're not fighting yourself every time. This is the golden opportunity. Now, if you just ignore that, you're going to be set yourself up for failure when you do come off or or struggle when they stop working. And nobody's having that conversation. I've written a couple of articles about it. Should you start a GLP-1? When you do, how do you come off? What do you do when it stops working? And when you look at the data, it's pretty clear. Majority of people will regain the weight if they haven't taken that opportunity to build the habits to maintain the healthy weight when things start not working or they require to come off because maybe their insurance stops paying for it. That's another thing, right? So lots of things can happen where you just don't have access to the medication or the medication stops working, and you have to be prepared for that.
Hmm. So, a lot of people who go plant-based for ethical reasons are not necessarily thinking about their health. So, what do most long-term vegans who feel that they don't have the level of health that they would like to see,
Mm-hmm.
where do they go wrong? And I also just want to be really clear that I am not saying that if you are plant-based and you get sick, that it's your fault. I mean, this
Oh,
is
yeah.
Earth. You know,
Yeah.
people get sick, and the longer we live, the more likely we are to get sick. So it's not
Yeah.
about, do's and don'ts and saints and sinners and stuff like that. But generally speaking, people who feel like they ought to be feeling better than they are getting better numbers when they go for their physical. What's going on in the vegan world?
Yeah. So I want to kind of reiterate or echo what you said is that I don't know anyone who got out of this life alive. So we're, at the end of the day, we live our best life and it will come to an end. And I personally believe we'll go on to a next, adventure, wherever that might take us and consciousness, where that might be. And that's your own personal belief, whatever. But at the end of the day, yes, the more we live, the more likely things can go wrong. But if you have switched to a vegan diet, let's say for ethical reasons, or even just because you think it's better for the earth, whatever those reasons may be, and you're not at the level of health that you would expect, I would first look at the quality of your diet. So when you look at the data, an unhealthy plant-based diet could be probably even worse than a standard American diet. And that goes back to removing the ultra processed foods. How often are you eating out? Because even though some people's like, well, I eat out, but I try to order healthy, there's still a ton of sodium. There's added, different oils and fried foods. And people don't quite understand the caloric density that comes with restaurant foods, even vegan plant foods. A lot of these are often, again, ultra processed substitute or what I would consider transitional foods for some individuals. And that could be part of the case. The other thing is, what's your relationship with food? Are you over consuming even those foods that we would consider healthy, like dates? I had one patient who was a type 1 diabetic. She has type 1 diabetes. And oftentimes I'll use dates as for someone who maybe is overdosed on their insulin to bring blood sugar back up because, they're very concentrated because it's a dried fruit and you'll see the blood sugar rise pretty quickly. And she goes, Dr. Mars, I can't have dates in my house. I was like, how come? She goes, because I literally eat an entire box. If there's a medjool date, she'll eat the entire thing in one sitting. And personally, I eat one medjool date and I feel kind of like, ooh, but she just would eat them. And so again, you got to be careful. Nuts and seeds, which are fabulous, you only need about a quarter cup or handful of nuts and seeds a day, but they're very calorically dense. How much oil are you using, right? So all of people, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with using like olive oil, but how much are you using? There's, you guys, per tablespoon, there's 120 calories of pure fat here. The liquid fat, the body's like, oh yeah, give me some more of that liquid fat. I'm going to store that away for a rainy day because your body's still thinking it's like 5,000 years from now, like back in the day when we didn't always have abundant food sources. So your body just still does what the body did to make you survive. It's going to store the fat. So, look at the quality of diet, look at the caloric density, start moving towards more whole foods. Try to, incorporate more the non-starchy veggies as possible and just really pay attention. That would be step one. Step two is I've had more than a few cases of patients who had very severe B12 deficiency. And they come in, oh, yeah, absolutely, with limb weakness, numbness, fatigue, anemia. And we measure B12 and it's just bottomed out. So when we measure B12, there's a couple things to pay attention to. You may hear some individuals say, oh, you need the B12 and you need methylmonic acid, which is fine. So, because what happens is B12 is required for methylmonic acid to be further processed. But what I have found is the only cases that I've seen methylmonic acid being elevated, which would be a B12 deficiency, is in the really severe cases. What's a more sensitive marker is homocysteine. So I would encourage you to measure B12 and then also homocysteine and try to keep that below 10. Now, there's other reasons that your homocysteine might be elevated. Again, you should be getting plenty of folate, but there's B6, B12, B9 is required by homocysteine to be further metabolized. But you guys, there's one supplement that, in my opinion, is non-negotiable. And I don't care who else has told you, oh, you can just eat fortified foods. I call hogwash. I've seen thousands of plant-based patients. I've actually taken care of a plant-based patient in every single state of this country because I am licensed off of these states and DC. Um, when you do that, it's not a reliable source of B12. And so most of my patients require 500 to 1,000 micrograms per day. And when you check your serum B12, you want to be between 500 and 1,100 because when you look at the 500, below that 500, you'll see symptoms of B12 deficiency. And above 500, you're pretty much beyond where most people would struggle. But again, just looking at that narrow lane B12 deficiency, please, 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 if there's just one thing you take from this entire conversation is please take your B12. Um, and if you have children that you are eating plant-based, make sure they're getting their B12 or loved ones that, you're like I did. I kind of pulled along a household of kids and a husband. I made sure they had their B12. And I will tell you that it's very, because sometimes B12 deficiency can be permanent, nerve damage. And so please, 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 please do that. Um, Beyond that, I would say the last thing I would say for vegan is look at all the other lifestyle factors. Are you exercising? How's your sleep? How's your stress? How's your community? Um, and really pay attention to not just your diet, but everything else in your life that moves the needle in health.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. Brilliant for anybody, and especially for people who care enough about themselves, animals, and the planet
Yeah.
to make these great food choices. So, as we wind down, everybody, don't we love her? Don't we love her as much as Beth loves her? Okay. Thank you, Beth. And thank you, Dr. Marbas. This has been wonderful. So, we're going to put all this stuff on the show notes at mainstreetvegan.com. So drlauriemarbas.substack.com. We're going to talk about her Substack in a couple of minutes here. And she's Dr. Laurie, Marbas, on Facebook and Instagram. And like I say, it will all be over there at mainstreetvegan.com. And while you are there, take a look at the Main Street Vegan Coach Training Academy program. We have been operative for, well, this is our 13th year. We're going to be doing our 39th cohort this fall. And because you listen to this podcast, I'm going to give you a code for $250 off. And that code is Veg Coach 250. If you've got questions, just let me know. Victoria at mainstreetvegan.com. Would love to have you join our incredible luminary professors in this live Zoom program where you're a real person, not a number or anything. And people take it and they love it. When somebody says to me, other than having my children, this is the best thing I've ever done, I listen and I'm grateful, and then I tell you. So that's Main Street Vegan Academy. Now, let's find out about Dr. Marbas on Substack, where you've got over 65,000 subscribers. Whenever I hear big numbers like that, I always think of a stadium. And it's like, oh my gosh. That's like what, 15,000, 10,000. You've got 65,000 subscribers, lucky people who are getting all this terrific information. So, did you have a moment of inspiration that made you say, okay, I'm going to Substack?
Yeah, I had heard about Substack about 4 years ago, and I thought, I already had a newsletter. I took creative writing in high school. I've written for Livestrong. I've written for local, like I said, the local newspapers. I've published 7 books while in medical school about visual mnemonics and cartoons. Anyway, it was one of my survival techniques in medical school. So I always loved that creative element. And I had always written ebooks for patients on different topics and, doing different things. And I was like, Substack seems to be an easy platform to start a newsletter. And I started it January of 2025, just writing it. I was just going to write about philosophy of healing and just really understanding what does it mean to actually heal? That people understand it's not doing everything perfect, it's just being consistent and doing those daily little things. And I quickly pivoted towards habits. A lot of my articles were about habits, and people were really responding to that. And I was like, interesting. And it came to me on a walk one day in Chula Vista, California, where we were camping. And I was like, this is really about healing habits. And I was like, interesting. What would be the good name of this Substack? Habit Healers. Healer of the habit. Yeah, like habit healers. And at first it was awkward to say, but now it just kind of rolls off the tongue. It's like the habit healers. I had a whole, mantra and everything. And the really cool thing was like, okay, so really what I'm doing is I'm translating science. I'm a physician. I've taken care of, gosh, I have no idea how many patients over the course of over 2 decades of practice. And I understand their problems. I've been, very blessed to you have conversations with patients that they don't even tell their spouse. And so you're having intimate discussions with people. You understand what is troubling them. Where did they struggle? I understand how to communicate with them. Who has been successful? Again, from the podcast and just working with patients in lifestyle medicine. I had my own telemedicine company called Plant-Based Telehealth. We started back in 2020 and we sold it to John Mackey a couple years later. So, I understood all of those things. And so then I just started writing about the science, putting it in layman's terms and making sure that people understood, okay, here's the science, this is what it means for you, and this is how you apply it to your life. And easy using behavior science. And it's really just taken off. So that's really was the inspiration, was just to be able to reach more people. Because when you do one-on-one care, I love my patients, but if I can reach more people now, especially with the experience that I have, I'm thrilled to see when people write back and say, Dr. Marbas, I've been doing, these tiny little healing habits, and my A1C is improved. I've lost, 16 pounds finally. My pain is gone. My husband's doing better or whatever. And what a thrill to not even know this person, that they're reading your words and they're healing themselves. You're giving agency to the human beings. And I'm just thankful that the universe has put this in my place, and then I can be successful enough to replace what I do as a physician and consider myself an educator at this point on health and reaching the masses, as many as I can. So,
Oh, that's beautiful. So, Dr. Laurie, Laurie, Marbas dot substack.com. Thank you so much. Thank you for
thank you.
taking the time. Thank you for your wisdom and your lightness. And thanks to everybody who listened. So, why don't we get ourselves out there and make Main Street vegan?